Hello and welcome to the Scrap Metal Armory. In this video I will just briefly touch upon a subject, one of the things I have found hard with collecting. And that is, as the title of this video will suggest, impulse buying. And how easy it is to find something and think, that looks cool, I want that one. And you think it might have some historical value, or maybe just as in my case, I saw that it was cheap, it was maybe historically interesting, it was of a model I liked, for example. And I bought it and it turned out to be pretty much, well, I can say some of it turned out to be crap, some of it actually turned out to be quite good. But that was just luck on my part. So I will just, as I said, briefly show you, as the video say, the good, the bad and the ugly. I have 3 impulse buys. One good, one bad and one just quite ugly, actually. And I thought I will show them to you and yeah, talk a little bit about how I thought when I bought them and what I have realized, well, after I bought them, that they maybe weren't as good as I thought. As I said, I will show you my impulse buys here. The good, the bad and the ugly, as I called them. But I will start here with, well, what I would call the bad. It's this here. This is a kukri, a Nepalese knife or, yeah, machete or some kind. They were used by, well, by fighters and soldiers in Nepal and other countries in that region for quite a long time. And they, of course, have been used by soldiers in the British Empire when they were fighting in that region, and of course during the Second World War, the Gurkha soldiers that used these knives were quite well known for fighting the Japanese, for example. And I really like the kukri knife. And I bought this one. It was one of my quite early purchases when I started to collecting swords and knives. And this one is quite obvious. Now that I know a little bit more about it, this one is quite obviously a fake. And that you can see primarily because of the lion's head pommel here. I don't know if, yeah, you might be able to see the lion's head pommel. Apparently that's almost never something like that on the originals, almost always. But it's never, almost never there on the originals, but very often there on fakes. I also understand, I'm not certain if this is correct, but I have understood that these dots here, let's see, yeah, like that. These dots here are quite unusual on originals as well. And I also heard that if you look at this shape here of the blade, it is almost like one angle here and another angle here. That's not really how the originals would have looked. They, most often at least, had one continuous curve on the spine here. But I think this is a Indian replica, probably made in the 60s or 70s for the tourist market. When I bought it I had absolutely no idea about that. The thing is, this was actually my 3rd choice that day. I was at an auction and they sold 3 kukris. And I didn't really have a lot of money, but this was the one I didn't really want. But the first one went too expensive, the second one as well. And this one was the only one left. So I decided, let's put a little bit of money on it and hope for the best. And I did get it for quite a little bit of money. So yeah, it was a success in that part, but then when I did a little research, when I got it home, I quite soon realized that, yeah, it's not a historical example. It's quite a good looking knife. Unfortunately, it is missing some pieces. It should have, don't know if you will be able to see it in this light here, but yeah, here here. In the scabbard there is space for 2 small knives, or actually 1 knife and 1 blunt instrument for sharpening the blade. And they are missing some, and yeah, it's not in perfect shape. It's a bit rusty. You might be able to see it here. Maybe. Yeah. So it's not in very good shape, but well, it's not an original anyway, so I don't really mind it. If you're interested in these kind of knives, Matt Easton over at the Schola Gladiatoria channel have a lot of interesting videos about kukris, and he seems to know a very lot about them. So that's a tip if you're interested. But for me, this is the bad impulse buy. Put it here for a moment. And then we had what I called the ugly impulse buy. That's just because I don't really see I don't really see what's oh, I lost my words. Here. Well, the one I called the ugly is this one, and that's just, it's not my aesthetic, pretty much. It's also not very historically correct. Well, it's not very historical, at least. Let's see if I can maybe get a little bit better lighting here. Yeah, you will have to see the foot of my lamp. But yeah, you can see here, it's well, it could be quite nice scabbard, but the detailing is half bad. And this one, the seller didn't know anything about it. I didn't know anything about it. What actually got me to buy it was extremely cheap. And let's see if it's at all visible. It has a date here. I think you might be able to see it there. Well, it has the year 1821 on it. And I thought, if it's actually the year this was made, then for that price, as I said, almost no money at all, then this would have been quite a good purchase. When I got home, I realized that some of the detailing here are quite rough. Yeah, on quite a lot of the parts it's not quite up to, well, the standards of a real historical weapon. So I started to dig in it and realized that this is a memorial knife for the Greek War of Independence. It was 1821. That's, well, and that's because the date is because of, well, that's what it memorializes. This isn't really a bad purchase though, because I looked up and most of these knives were actually made in 1921 as a kind of 100 years anniversary. So even if it's not quite as historical as I hoped, it's still 99 years old right now. Hopefully, at least. I did realize that some of them apparently were made in the 80s, and this might be, but I hope it's at least 100 years old, and thereby a little bit interesting at least. And from a little bit of distance, it does actually look quite alright. But yeah, it's not really my aesthetic, so I don't really know what I will do with this. That only leaves with my good impulse buy. And it's, let's see, this one here. This is from Congo. Let's see, I did actually write up the name of it. 1 second. It's usually called something like a Salampasu knife or Salampasu sword. And I'm not certain about this, but I think that is because they were made and used by a tribe called the Salampasu people. As I said, this is just from 5 minutes of googling the name of Salampasu, so I'm not certain about that. But it seems that these here were made and used by the Salampasu people that lived in and around the Republic of Congo. And they apparently used this kind of knife here, or sword, for quite a long time, so very hard to know how old this one is. I think it's from the 1800s, that's my guess. It's a little bit difficult to get out of the scabbard, and that's because it's quite an evil looking blade. It has these fangs, or, well, pikes. This wouldn't also need a clean, I see. I will have to do that. But this one I really like, actually. It's a very simple looking sword or knife, or, well, machete almost. It's still quite sharp, and it's interesting. I know very little about African swords. The little knowledge I have is, well, read in 5 minutes on the internet, as I said. But the African swords usually have some really interesting designs, as I said. This is almost like a short sword. It reminds me about a Roman gladius or something like that, but of course in time it's totally different. But it's not really like anything that would have been used in the 1800s in Europe or Asia or anywhere else. So this one, actually, it was an impulse buy. I only bought it because it was cheap, and I didn't really know anything about it. But I really liked it. So I bought it, and I actually had this evaluated to a lot more than I bought it for. It's still not a very expensive sword in any, well, sense of the word, but a lot more than I paid for it. So this is my good impulse buy. So let's see if I can get all three in picture a little bit here. So this short video is both a little bit of a warning, because if I did all of these purchases again, I wouldn't have bought any of this one. Absolutely not this one. It's not historically accurate, really. It's has no interest for me at all. I don't really know what I will do with that one. See if I can sell it cheap, maybe, or just use it as a tool. It is a tool. It's well, a machete, pretty much. This one, I don't really think I would buy either. Of course, if I had any Greek heritage or anything like that, I probably would think it was a lot more interesting. But for me, I don't really have any connection to Greece, and well, I don't really see the aesthetically pleasing thing about these. They are also very common, at least here in Sweden. You see them everywhere on different marketplaces, and they almost never sell for any amount of money. So I would skip to this one, I think. This one is a little bit harder to say if I would have skipped or not. For the price, I still think I would have bought it, actually, even when I looked it up. Because, as I said, it is a very interesting sword, I think, even if I don't really know anything about it. So I would probably have bought this one for the price I got it for. So, as I said, this is a warning, but it's also an encouragement. Sometimes, if it is really cheap, it might be worth buying. And as I have said in some of my previous videos, it's really the research after I buy something that I think is the most interesting part of, well, collecting. I love doing the research. Of course, it was disappointing to know that these two were not really what I expected, but doing the research was still fun, and realizing this was quite an interesting sword, actually, that made it so much better. So yeah, it was just a small video to show you my impulse buys and tell you, well, what I think about them now after I had them for a few months.